too. In fact, this should be tape number 37. And this tape's more dedicated toward Dad and his life, and not so much my grandpa and grandma, although if there's, comments that come to mind, I certainly like them to be shared. But I wanted to focus more on Dad's life, and really anything you want to tell us about your life. I kind of have a list of buzzwords that will help, things that I'm interested in and that I think are worthy to be on the tape. But usually what I do is I just
buzz away.
I ask them, just tell us, your full name, where you're born, just some simple facts, and it kind of goes from there usually.
Kenneth Franklin White, born in Salt Lake City, one of a family of 4 living, 6 that were, well, I had 2 older brothers who died at birth, and grew up mainly in the Salt Lake area.
Okay. A lot of that we can pretty much gather from the prior tape, of course. I'm going to give you your plug. Dad, tell us why you're a Democrat.
Why am I a Democrat?
Why are you a Democrat and a Republican?
All right, I will be serious about this. I really am. I asked my dad the same reason, same question, because I thought, why is it? I wanted to know that question, why he was a Democrat. He had every reason to be a Republican later on in his life.
Mm-hmm.
But he felt, because he was in the real estate business, meaning ground, that there was 3 things that mattered in life: food, clothing, and shelter. Anything more than that was a luxury. But you have to have food, clothing, and shelter, in that order. And so where he had ground, he naturally, you have to be able to sell the ground, and you have to have development. And he primarily catered to the young people so that they could have the American dream, have or a piece of the American dream, to have a home, rather than just renting, rather than just existing, so to speak. They actually have and own a home. Then after you have those sorts, the food, clothing, and shelter, then if you want a boat, you want a motor home, or what have you, and you can afford it, more power to you. He felt that was, first of all, you get first things first. And inch by inch, anything's a cinch. By the yard, it's hard. I think you probably have heard that many times from me, but
I do.
Inch by inch, anything's a cinch. By the yard, it's hard. You can be anything you want to be. All you got to do is pay the price. My dad called it pay the price. Whether that be education or wanting it bad enough, you could do anything you want to be. You want to be, I'd like to say you could be president of the United States, but there's a lot to that. But what I'm saying, a lot aspire to that, but very few ever make it. But set realistic goals, and then stay the course. And he was a Democrat, and the reason he told me is that he did better under Democratic administration, home building seemed to be, help the,
More favorably.
well, in his way of thinking, they were to help young people get into home, whether it be interest rates or whatever it is. The environment was such that he felt that that philosophy was there. And after all, it's the Christian way to be.
Of course.
There's nothing wrong with giving. There's nothing wrong with giving. Can't just take. Can't just hoard. It's the democratic philosophy is a Christian way of living. And I was named after Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who was, I believe he served, was it 3 or 4 terms? Can't remember now. But anyway, he served longer than, he would have served longer than he did, but he died while he was in office. I believe he, 12 years or so. And he was very beloved. He believed in you rolling up your sleeves and getting to work, and that the Democrat philosophy is for the blue-collar workers. Now, Dad was, obviously he could be either, but he never
Came from blue collar.
he came from a blue-collar background. He came from pretty much nothing, and was a self-made man. And I listened to his explanation, and because I wanted to know why I was named after a Democratic president. And you're not going to change it. I don't care what it is you want to come up with. I'm not completely impressed with all of them that were out there. I won't list the ones that I weren't impressed with. But it isn't the man who sits in the office, it's the party that sits in the office. A lot of people, they'll come and tell me, they say, well, I like this guy, I like this guy. Well, forget that. It isn't that guy that runs things. It's the party that runs things. Party bosses, if you will. And so, if you're in the military, I can understand why you maybe lean towards a Republican point of view. That I can understand.
At least today. 20, 30 years ago, from now, it could be different.
I can respect why you would be that way. If you're a doctor, I can see why you would lean that way. If you're a person of wealth, and a lot of wealth, I can see why you would lean that way. I at least understand how it works. And everybody should take the time to understand the philosophies of the two parties. Neither party has a corner on how to wage war. We use the same generals, same armies, same men. We're all just as patriotic. It's just the philosophy of political philosophy. Now with that, I'm going to leave that be, because I could go on a long time about that.
No, I think that's important. I do. I think it's important. Tell us about, and I know this is difficult to keep in a short period of time, but horses were a big part of your life for many, many, many years. And a lot's already been written and can be found in journals already. Other videotape that's been taken on the White Quest presentation and the barn and Cedar Valley, and so lots have been already written But, maybe tell us why you like horses and, you know, why you involved yourself with horses and why it became a love.
Just to back up a little bit, my thoughts were on there. I wanted to mention, I'm not a way left. I'm not a
You're
way.
a moderate Democrat?
Yeah. Just like
Conservative Democrat?
some Republicans aren't real proud of their far right ones. I'm not real proud of the far left. I sit a little left to the center of aisle, the aircraft, if you will be. But anyway, I sit on the left side of the aircraft, but I'm not clear out on the wingtip, no. Okay, now the horses, you say?
Yeah.
Horses, I always had an interest in horses. I grew up with, in a rural setting, and Dad had a barn, and he couldn't afford to have horses year-round when he was young. They would go up to Fort Douglas and they would get some horses and break them out to plow their gardens and various things, and Dad would teach them to plow. And then he would take them back to the military and let them feed them during the winter months. And later on came the tractors, the 8N Ford tractors. They came out, and you didn't have to feed them in the winter time. You just covered them up with a blanket and a tarp, and you didn't have to mess with them during the winter months. Anyway, he had teams, and mainly did cultivating. When he got the 8N tractor, I thought, oh boy, this is great. I got a tractor I can work with. This will do more work than a horse. Sure it would. But when it came down to me using the tractor, the 8N tractor, and him, if there was a horse that was hooked to a cultivator, he'd tell me, get the tractor out of the field, let me do it with the horse, because a truly well-trained horse would put one foot in front of the other, and it would go up through the furrows, and the tractor would drive all over the
ruts,
plants.
yeah.
So anyway, he'd put the reins over his shoulders and stuff. I watched him do that. Well, when I got to be about 15, 16 years old, 14, 15, somewhere around there, I told him I wanted a saddle horse. He said, what do you want a saddle horse for? I said, just to have to ride, you know, to be fun to have. He said, well, it won't do any work. So you can see where his priorities were as far as the horse. To him, it was a beast of burden. For me, it was just something to ride and enjoy the contact with the horse and not have a motor running under you all the time. So my very first horse, her name was Duchess. She was part saddlebred and part quarter horse. She was not a Morgan horse. Great saddle horse, fun saddle horse. And then I got busy in the concrete business and one thing and another, and I just didn't have time to use her, and somebody came along and I sold the horse to a little gal, forget her name now, but, and I got away from them, and then when I got so wrapped up in construction, I decided I needed something to get away from the screaming diesels and the engines and the stuff, and I found a man by the name of Junior Forbes who trained horses, and
Right there in Lehigh, right?
well, that isn't where I first met him. He was he trained horses for all over from Layton on down to Lehigh, yeah. But his whole life was around horses. It was a simple life for him. He knew more about horses and what they did and why they did things. Probably forgot more than I ever know. And I like thinking I know quite a bit about it over the years. You know, you can't spend that many years, 30 plus years, 35 years, and not get some insight of what horses do, why, what, when, and where, and how. People used to come up to me and they'd say, my horse just loves the trot. My horse just loves the gallop or the lope. Or my horse just loves this and loves that. Well, it gets old. There's only two things horses want to do: eat and be left alone. Anything else is work. And I remember a lady coming up to a horse show one time, and I was talking to a man that was in town from Indiana with a string of horses. And this lady started in with, my horse just loves this and loves to do this and everything. And finally I had taken about all I could stand, because it was one of my pet things. I just thought, this is so ridiculous. They don't like to do nothing. And I told her, I says, there's only two things that a horse likes to do: eat and be left alone. To prove that to you, you take a Poussance horse. A Poussance, for those who maybe don't know, is a jumping horse.
Okay.
And it's a horse that jumps very, very high. And the one that jumps the highest, which can be 8 to 12 feet high and clear the columns, is quite high. Put that same horse in a 5-foot-high fence, and that horse will be inside that fence the next morning. Why? Because jumping over a 5-foot fence is work. Eat and be left alone. That's all they like to do. Anyway, we got to showing horses, and I got the idea. I thought, well, I'd like to go into breeding horses. And my first stallion that I got was a horse by the name of Ware's Nighthawk, and it came from Frank and Frida Ware in Santiago Canyon out of California. And the Wares were quite well known for their Morgan horses and the love for the Morgan horses, and were well respected in California as nationwide for their breeding and the beliefs that they had in government-bred Morgan horses. Now, some people say, well, why not an Arabian? Why not a quarter horse or another breed like that? I like all horses for what they were bred to do. Mine just happened to be Morgan horses. The United States Army, if you want to argue, I used to love to debate somebody who had an Arabian horse who says, oh, my horse is beautiful. Sure, they're beautiful, but they're also a little hot-headed. And the United States Army, when they were looking for horses, for troop type horses to carry troops, and also pull gun emplacements, they looked for the traits that were of the Morgan breed. Now you have to remember, in the early years, there was not a Morgan registry. per se. But it was those traits of the Morgan horse that the government looked and tried to buy from breeders. Now the government's got a lot of money, and if they thought Arabians was it, they would have bought Arabians.
Yeah.
Because Arabian's a very old breed. But pretty is pretty does. And the military likes to have good, solid, level-headed horses. And the thing I found about Morgan horses is once you got through teaching them something, the following year when you got them out, they remembered what they were taught. Now, I like all breeds, and I have seen exceptions to the rules. There have been some good Arabians that I've thought a lot of, and I've been around a lot of good ones. Gay Adventure being one of them. Whether it be Polish or Egyptian bred. I've seen them all, and for a given purpose, for today's world, for my world, today's world, a Morgan horse is best suited for today's world. You don't have to ride them every day. Usually, even though we did ride them almost every day while we were showing them, you could ride them once a week, once a month, or something like that, and they had more retention of what they were taught.
That makes sense. That makes sense.
In Arabian, you had to re-break it every spring. Just about had to reteach it every time. And but they are beautiful horses. And there was exceptions. And those were good exceptions. They were good horses, and they were good Arabians, and I'll always remember them. But if you're a long-legged person, a saddlebred maybe be of your interest. They are, after all, a Cadillac of the show horse. They're used for gated purposes. They have 5 gates, and Morgan horses have 4, really. The one, well, there's walk, trot, canter, and then there's a rack. And a gated horse will rack on. Anyway, the rack is just an easy way of getting from point A to point B with a smooth ride. Really, it's almost a pace. Not really a pace, but it's kind of like a pace.
So Morgan won't do that?
No. Well,
Will Hardin.
there are people who have bred Morgan horses to pace, but it is not a recognized gait for the Morgan breed. They're a very massive front-shouldered kind of horse. They're actually, a lot of people don't know this, is the Morgan horse was the forerunner to the Tennessee walking horse.
I didn't know that either.
Because of the tremendous front shoulders that it had to have for all of the, if you've ever seen a walking horse walk or show, there's a lot going on up front, and they kind of scoot along behind. And it's almost a pace, but it's not. But that was the way they went. And tobacco plantation owners in the southern states would use the Tennessee walking horse to go look at their tobacco plantations and stuff. But the Morgan horse was primarily used by the United States Army. And to this day, the Army still uses Morgan horses, and still to pull the case on if a president is assassinated or loss of life in office. Those
They're Morgan horses that do that.
not if they're white.
Well, yeah, that's because
There
Morgan
are-
horse, they don't register them if they're above
Right.
the knees.
But the United States government, the University of Vermont government farm, and they had stallions, and during the War of the States, the Minutemen and one thing and another, they wanted to get their hands on horse flesh because it was like anything else. To have your troops all mechanized to where they could get from point A to point B, had military significance to it. Made your troops, you could move great distances, if you will. Now they do it with trucks and jeeps and everything. But during the Civil War, it was that way.
Do this for me. Name all your horses so that.
Oh, geez.
'Cause I'll forget.
There were so many.
Well, the main ones. I mean, and maybe just.
I'd leave one out, I'm sure, but there was Where's Nighthawk? He was a stallion, big stallion, and there are photographs of him.
Okay.
And then I'll list the stallions first. Then there was Troutbrook Moon Magic. We called him Fonzie.
Right.
And he had a personality all of his own. And people in the East, where he came from the Rhode Island farm, Troutbrook Farm in Rhode Island, Bill Pickard, I believe it was, raised the horse. He was the son of a world champion, Wasika's Moonshot.
Okay.
Pretty horse. I don't remember his Moonshot ever doing anything other than be pretty. So pretty is as pretty does. But Fonzie was the nickname that he got, and I just happened to hear some kids back east at a Syracuse, New York show say, well, Fonz is here, Fonz is here, and or Fonzie's here, and I realized that they were talking about Troutbrook Moon Magic, and so it was kind of fun. They were legendary horses. The young kids followed them much like they would football players if you're in the horse world.
Okay.
Then there was Alexander. Elm Hill Alexander. Now when I say Elm Hill, that's the Elm Hill Farms. And when I say Troutbrook Moon Magic, it's the Troutbrook Farm. And when I say Ware's Nighthawk, that's from the Ware's Farm.
Right, okay.
These are prefixes. And my prefix is White Quest. And I had White Quest Chaos and White Quest different ones.
Yeah.
That I raised, and that's their registered name. And those prefixes stay with the horses, and when they're showed, it is respectful to the breeder to list the horse's full name. It has to be shown on the papers. So anyway, that's.
So there's Alexander.
Alexander, and Alexander was a little horse, but he had a big heart. He was only about 14 one hands, and so he wasn't big enough to ride. He really wasn't very big to do anything with. But I had a hunch when I saw him. I thought the Elm Hill Farms, in all due respect to them, and I mean this with a great deal of respect, because they're a very respected breeder back east. They were too closely bred. They were line bred, I felt. And I thought by taking one of their stallions and breeding them to my mares that were in the west, that his size will not, I don't want to use the word.
Won't be a dominant trait.
Won't be a runt. I don't mean that he was a runt. He wasn't a runt by no means, but he was definitely smaller. And he never had a foal out of him that wasn't over 15-1 hand. So exactly what I expected from as good a breeding animal as Fonzie was, or Nighthawk was a 15-1, 15-2 hand horse. A hand being
Okay. And that's to the
and
measurement
if
of,
you measure, you stack them up there, 15 of them, and then 2 fingers, 15-2.
oh, okay.
Okay, that's how they measure the height, the wither.
Okay.
Okay. Anyway, Nighthawk was about 15-1, almost 15-2, and Fonzie was about 15 hand.
Okay.
And but Alexander was about 14. Now that's quite a bit shorter. Doesn't seem that much, but it is. It really is when you're looking at the horse. Those were the stallions. Now the mares, they came from various places also. There was one of the probably the famous mare that I had was Topfield's Janet, and she had watched her. I had gone back east. I had another mare that was by the name of Roman Holiday from the Roman Farms,
And what city is, what state?
Syracuse, New York.
Okay.
And I she was,
Topsfield is Massachusetts, right? Was that Massachusetts?
Massachusetts area.
Okay.
But it was the Topfield Farm. And in watching Roman Holiday go, I happened to see this other mare, this Topfield, who happened to be in the same stable out of the Hobby Knoll stable. Jim and Ann Anderson were the trainers. And very competent hands, very competent people, very courteous to me, very gracious to me. Do a horse show and visit with them. But somewhere along the line, the owners of Topfield Janet had to.
She was 13 years old. As I remember the story, she was 13 years
She's about
in the pasture. And then they
No,
made,
no.
no? Well, she was in the pasture for a long period of time. Then
They
someone saw
passed.
potential in her.
I think she broke out, but they didn't really do anything with her as far as trying to develop her athletic ability until she was about 10
Okay.
or 12.
Okay.
And she was a very high withered horse. I have it was done by Jeannie Herrick. It's original oil painting, the only one in existence that was done by her. And she was a very athletic mare, and she was all very, very light on her feet, and she did it with little or no weight on her feet. Not much more than what we call a keg shoe. She wore custom shoes, yes, but she wore no weight. The better she performed, which is interesting, because normally you put a little weight on a horse to get them to want to elevate their front end, their front feet. But anyway, She was a very, very gifted animal. And the Andersons, Hobby Knoll Stable, they knew how to get it out of her. And anyway, they were just about to go to the Grand Nationals, and the Aruda family had, and so I thought, I don't know if I need a horse that age, because it was quite, she was getting quite a bit of age, if I wanted to spend $35,000 basically for a broodmare. And but I told him, I said, I'll tell you what, I'm going to come back and watch Holly go anyway, Roman Holiday go at the Syracuse show. I'll come back and I will watch her go, and I'll give you an answer then. So they did. And I went with a fellow that I knew that was a horse buff, Joe Hubby, from Hubby's Morgans. And it's funner to go when you got somebody around with you anyway that has the same bat the ball back and forth, so to speak, to decide whether you want to pay this big number or not. It's the sale of the horse. He didn't know why it was there. Other than well, Holly won her qualifying class, and then had won her qualifying class, and it got to the championship amateur park saddle horse, and so she'd done all she was there to do. And I remember going up into the bleachers, and I had seen the mare work, and she impressed me. I'd always watched her for a couple of 3 years while they were bringing her on. And Jim looked up at me and he says, pointed at her, and I knew it was decision time, and I gave him the thumbs up.
You'll take her.
I bought a horse, and he smile came across his face. I remember the smile come across. He wanted to keep he felt she could be a world champion, and so he had a reason for wanting to keep her. And Annie certainly wanted to. He went over and he whispered to Annie that I had given the thumbs up on the mare. And I can remember she whopped her with the riding crop a little bit, you know, and she came in there and she just blew the crowd right away. She did. In fact, it was probably the greatest show she ever had put on, even before she won the world championship, because of the moment, the emotion, the great release that suddenly she's got a new owner, and we're gonna really make it happen tonight. And so they hit the field running, and horses between her and the next place horse. And then they announced, the announcer says that Topfield Giant will be retiring under the minute you say retire, there was a gasp in the Coliseum. You mean she's not going to show again, you know, like that. Yeah. And in under the Aruda colors, and will be leaving under the White Quest colors, Salt Lake City, Utah. And of course, the fellow I came with, he about fell out of the bleachers because he knew nothing. He knew nothing of it until that moment. She went on. She was almost undefeated, and in the in the ring. I rarely she ever got. I mean, she got beat now and then, but not often. The first year she went to Grand National, she went reserve world champion. UVM Promise of the University of Vermont. UVM Promise was the name of the horse, who was a world champion horse, halter horse. Janet went reserve. Very upset because they felt Janet had won. I thought she'd done enough, but I the judge's decision, but the crowd noticeably was upset. In return,
Oklahoma City.
no, yeah, Oklahoma City. And then I was returning home from another show the following year. How much I'm proud to be known by, and the reason is the fact that I thought, you know, people came up to me and they recognized me. Now, this is interesting. I didn't know them from Adam. And they knew all about my horses. And they says, will Janet be at the World Championships this next October? I looked at them and I thought, well, you know, they must be fans of hers, you know.
Right, right.
And I says, yes, if she's ready, she'll be there. We don't know yet, but if she's ready, we will take her and present her again. Well, we did, and that year she won, and she beat Trophy's Jade. And so that was the year, I forget which year it is.
Like 80s, early 80s.
4 or something.
Yeah.
Somewhere in the 80s.
Now, her age when she won the world championship.
She was 13 years old.
So she was 13, and older, much older than the typical horse that would win the championship,
Yeah,
right?
but more than that, she was a mare.
And she was a mare.
And mostly, generally, Park Saddle Champion horse is a stallion for that stamina. What few people knew that night is that we had a game plan, much like you would a football team. We felt that we would hold her back because we thought that the judge would have call for a work-off, because the judge had worked this Trophy Jade horse. And we were afraid that politically we might get beat again. And so I told Annie, I says, let's hold her back a little bit so that we've got some bloom left for the championship.
Okay.
The work-off never came. The judge signed the card. Here we'd held her back. And we never got to show the crowd what she could really do.
Oh, that's too bad. Now, I was there. I remember being there. You had the first time
Well,
you videotaped it, and I was there in Oklahoma City.
That was what had happened. So we always kind of felt like, geez,
And this was an open...
she did enough to win it.
Was this an open breed, or was this just a
No,
Morgan
it was
breed?
just Morgan breed.
Okay.
No, just Morgan breed. That's Janet. She was the greatest one. And then there was Mannix Easter Star from the Manic Farms
Where's the Manic Farms at?
out of Sacramento, California.
Okay.
And then there was, there was
Sunday
a lot.
Dawn?
There was a lot of Sunday Dawn. Well, of course, Sunday Dawn was one I raised,
Okay.
and he had a mind of his own, but I was able to keep him in check.
Yeah.
But he was a good horse.
Now, what was the horse that was I think it was a reserve world champion, Western Pleasure, that you bought later after Janet?
Rayo's Touch of Class.
Yeah, Rayo's Ditch.
We called him Classy for short.
Right. And what farm? Rayo.
Rayo.
But what state? I'm always interested what state. Do we
Can't
call?
remember now. Indiana, somewhere around.
Okay.
He was a good horse. I rode him as a just saddle horse in the backyard. Sometimes that was good for him. They show him and sour him, and so they like getting out of the round ring, the walk, trot, and canter sort of thing, and go out and ride in the hills. And he was fun to ride. He was a good horse. But he was the year I bought him he was the 3-year-old world Western Pleasure champion as a 3-year-old, and he went on. I don't know how many. Nighthawk in his career won over 200 or 300 but grand championships. I had trophies all over the place. And Janet, the same thing. I had trophies all over.
Grand champions, that's for a show.
For a show.
For a show. Okay.
Each show has a grand champion stallion, and he was grand champion more than he was not. We quit showing him in hand when he got to be about 10 or 12, somewhere in there, because they start to lose their bloom like anything. Horses usually go to about 15 to 20 years old, depending on lots of things, but usually they start to go downhill after the 10, 12 years, which makes Janet winning the world championship at 13 even more interesting.
Yeah.
To beat the boys, the stallions, at the age of 13, and she beat them soundly, and we didn't even open the throttle up on her.
That's too bad.
Now, there's only a few of us that in history that know that. That's Ann Anderson, Jim Anderson, and myself. And now whoever hears this tape.
Yeah.
But that night, there was 3 of us knew we were holding her back. And when Annie almost fell off the saddle when she heard her number called out. I was the owner of the horse, and I was the last one in the Coliseum to know who had won it. There was such an arouse of applause and yelling and screaming that I could see a horse coming towards me, and I was trying to film it. And it wasn't until she passed and I saw her number on her back that I realized that it was Janet they'd called out.
Oh.
So here I was the owner, and I was the last one to know.
That's an interesting story. I think you've told me that, but I forget. I forget all the details. I forget. Oh, tell me. As far as you want to go into it, some of the health struggles you've had. I think they'd want to know about those. People would want to know about those. Your family.
Well,
That's been a big part of your life that you've struggled with. And
yeah, it was. It popped out. The Vietnam War was just getting cranked up, and I had enlisted in the 625th Military Police Company, And I was to leave on a following Wednesday on the train to report at Fort Ord, California, and then on to Camp Gordon, Georgia for advanced infantry training. And I came down with what pneumonia, and the pneumonia triggered a problem called Crohn's disease, which is an inflamed small intestine. Now, to be 19 years old, it was, you know, little did they know. The doctors thought it was red hot appendicitis. And so when they opened me up, they had to close me right back up. They couldn't do anything because they hadn't medicated me to do any operation on the small intestine. And so they tried to medicate it. And I was trying to go to school at the University of Utah at the time, and I was taking 32 pills a day. And I mean, that's pretty well wasted. I mean, you know, and I get right up to where it was going to be test week, and I'd end up in the hospital. And I did that twice. Tried 2 different quarters and tried it twice. And I realized, well, it just isn't meant to be. Because it takes so long to recover in between operations and stuff. I thought I'm just going to have to make my living with my brawn instead of my brain. And so went into construction, concrete business, crushing, and made my living with my hand, basically.
You've been in this for surgery on several occasions after that. And
Oh
they had
yeah,
to remove
it
portions of your small
was a
intestine.
reoccurring thing about every 8 to 10 years.
They get inflamed and
Yeah, they would go in and bypass.
see, Crohn's disease, as I understand it, is a rejection of any organ, but this specifically was ileitis, which is a form of Crohn's disease, which affected the small intestine.
That's a fact. And I was told the older I got, the less prevalent it'd be a problem. And my weight will fluctuate. Sometimes sometimes 150 pounds, sometimes right now I'm about 240 pounds. You can take 100 pounds on or off of me, you know, and depending on if I'm feeling pretty good, I eat pretty good. That's pretty normal.
Yeah.
If I'm not feeling very good, I don't eat very good. So consequently, it's hard to keep weight on. And anyway, I've had to put up with that my whole life. I don't remember a morning.
I know it's been real hard.
I don't remember a morning I ever went to work that I didn't feel like I was nauseated and sick. Yet I still went out, got on bulldozers, caterpillars, backhoe, and got in the muddy ditches and stuff because I had to do it with my brawn instead of with my brain. And I don't know. It was just hard to do.
Now, these are
Kept me out of the military. Yes, I mean they didn't want me in there. It'd been a blessing in doing. I'd at least got disability, and maybe one day somebody, either Democrats or Republicans, will get down and have some health care for them. But I've worked pretty hard, and I think I'm as good as anybody else. The next person, I think I'm entitled to some health care too.
You've had a hard time getting it, haven't you?
Can't get it.
Obviously.
19, from that time on, I was blackballed. And I don't think that's right. I think insurance companies should have to take the good with the bad. and they won't touch me. So all my life, I've never had the peace of mind like other people have of insurance.
Yeah.
And that's a mental strength.
Yeah.
Another reason I'm a Democrat. But no, they haven't really produced either. They all talk about it, but they never happen.
Now, some of the fun stories when you're growing up is when you tell us about, you had a Corvette that you'd saved up money
The
and bought.
1962 red Corvette, red interior. Hottest machine I ever sat in my life.
It was a hardtop convertible, right?
No, well, it had a hard top, but it had its cloth top underneath.
Okay.
Yeah, I paid $5,300 for this car. Brand spanking new, fuel injected, 327-inch engine,
Fiberglass body,
fiberglass body.
and you shouldn't be around today.
She could sit down, she could sit at a light and burn rubber for 600 feet, 2 football fields. And there'd be, I mean, it was fast. It was the fastest thing I ever lived with. It was, well, it was just funner than hell. I mean, it was a good car. But I had a reputation down on State Street that, yeah, it was just like Dodge City down there, you know, when you first show up with a hot car. And after I got through burning them up,
How often do you go through tires?
oh, I went through tires all the time.
I remember the story you told me. You
About
go
once
through-
a month, it seemed like I'd burn up the tire.
Would you take it down to Grandma's tires
Oh.
and put the tires on Grandpa's account?
Yeah, well, that was when gasoline was only 28 cents a gallon, too. 28 cents a gallon, but my tire bill was more than my gasoline bill.
Now, one story I remember you telling me that's all you can remember when you would race the thing, which you raced it often, I know, is that you just remember the keys would stick straight out. They would
Yeah,
dangle down.
absolutely, absolutely.
Keys would stick straight
Keys
out.
would stand, in fact, if they wouldn't catch, they would come right out of the ignition. I mean, whoever was riding with me, there's that bar in the front.
Yeah.
It's called a panic bar, and that's what it really truly is. They'd grab a hold of that bar when that thing done. And what she would do is the front end would come up a little bit, but the back end would crouch down. And it was just, it was designed for drag racing. When the Stingray, the 1963 Stingray came out and they made the body change, they ruined the Corvette. Never wanted a Corvette since. I wouldn't own one. But you give me 62, I'd buy one tomorrow.
That's funny. Now, what was its final demise? I know that you sold it, and you saw it on the lot. Somebody stole it off the lot.
Well, I bought the car, like I say, for $5,300, and I drove it. Well, I never got hit. I never got hurt in it, and never got a ticket in it. I'll remind you, I never got a ticket in it. No, I won't say I wasn't on the highway where I could have got a ticket with it. It's just, back in my day, there wasn't all that much commotion going on. There wasn't all that much traffic either. But I didn't make it either. It didn't make it right to be doing what I was doing with it. But I never did get a ticket. Not that I didn't deserve one. I did. But I don't know. I raced it on drag strips, Orange County, California, out in Butte, Montana. I beat 409 Chevs. Remember the song 409? Yeah. They were nothing. 7 car lengths in a quarter mile. Eat them up, just eat them up right out my tailpipe. A 406 Ford I had a little respect for, but that was only maybe 3-car length.
Yeah.
But a 406 Ford had outrun a 409. Yet they made the song after the 409.
That's the sound.
But this 62 Chevy convertible, I don't know if anybody's ever made a movie about that, you know.
Yeah.
But it was one hot car. Really hot. So hot I had to replace the springs in the back because it would crouch down
Yeah.
and it would collapse the springs.
Huh.
But she was just like a cat. She just dropped like that when you let off on it. And she'd go 65 in first gear. I mean, you break the speed limit, you know, in first gear, you know, you had 3 more to go, you know. Don't know how fast it would go.
Automatic or stick? Was it a stick?
4-speed.
Okay.
4-speed. Do 90 in second. I never got hurt, and I'm not gonna say I couldn't have got hurt, but I was careful, you know, as much as you. No, but I was young at the time. But I was called the Corvette Kid by different ones.
Olympus High School, right? Where you went?
Yeah, yeah. We had there were a lot of cars that were hot rods, the Model Ts that were cut, you know, with big motors in them and stuff. I took it to the drag strip one time, and when I got the drag strip, none of the other cars showed up in my class. Okay, they went in classes, and
Okay.
the next. So if you didn't, nobody was in your class, then you had to go to the next class up. Meant I had to race a funny car. Well, a funny car, you can't beat one of them.
Yeah.
They had races slicks that wide,
Yeah.
and they just eat you alive, you know.
Yeah.
And but I was Class A Super Sport was my classification, and when I'd show up, nobody'd want to come. They'd go home because it's the way it was. So I would do a demo run, you know, burn up a bunch of tires and smoke up the crowd good, you know, and come back down and just let them know I'm still around, you know. But it was a fun car. I sold it for $3,400. Had a lot of fun for $2,000. And it
How
had
many years you had
I
it?
put about 38,000 miles on it. And I sold it. I needed a different kind of car. And I bought a 1963 Pontiac Grand Prix. White interior. And it was pretty fast, but it wasn't the same kind of car.
Yeah.
Never been in a car as fast. That's the fastest car I've ever been in my life. It was a 62 Corvette.
Tell me, as you talk about your car, it reminds me of some of the stories of how you met Mom, Michelle.
Mm-hmm.
Tell me some of the stories that you may think would be interesting. One of them comes to mind is where she used to work at.
I know what you're going to say already.
Yeah.
Oh, let's see.
At the root beer place.
Yeah, your mom was working at the A&W
Yeah.
up there on 20th East and 23rd East,
33rd South.
39th South. 39th South. And she was working at an A&W place. Well, anyway, I was down home and I knew she was working. And my cousin Sherry White had come into town. She lived somewhere out of state, and she'd come into town, and so I asked, I said, you wanna go up and get a root beer? You know, and I wasn't thinking what I was doing. I really wasn't setting nobody up or nothing.
You were dating her at the time, right?
Yeah, I dated her, and we were pretty serious, and so here I come in with Sherry, my cousin, you know, and your mom started adding up 2 and 2 and coming up with 28, you know, real fast, you know. Anyway, it became apparent to Sherry, you know, what the deal was, so Sherry started, you know, moving over a little closer to me and stuff, you know, and I said, we'd like 2 root beers, please. And wasn't any comment, went in, she came out with 2 root beers, and she had them both in one hand, and she, you want 2 root beers? Yes, please. And she just poured them right down on my head, all over my upholstery.
That's a funny story.
Anyway, I stuffed that car in reverse, and I burnt rubber clear out of there. Mad, I was just mad. And then I realized what I'd done, you know, I mean, I was just there. Yeah, I guess I knew what I was doing, but.
You didn't expect the reaction that way. Yeah.
No, I didn't expect it to be drowned with root beer, no.
That's funny. Tell us about some of the boating experiences. You like boats. We've always liked boats. If you want to tell us about some of your boats, one of the stories I'd like to hear is the Yellowstone trip, because that's kind of a family thing where we were.
But I took all you kids up to Yellowstone, and I knew Yellowstone quite well. Knew she could get really rough and really stormy and one thing and another, because Dad always had a boat up there, and so I knew the lake and I knew the characteristics of the lake. And I'd put in over at Lake Lodge. Normally I'd put in at Thumb, but this particular trip I'd put in over at I forget the name of the bay, Inlet Bay, over by Lake Hotel. And I asked the ranger that morning, I says, how does the straits look? Meaning from Thumb out through the mouth of the Thumb. If you draw a straight line going, it's kind of northeast, there's a big stretch of water where the wind, if it's coming just right, you can really get rough water out there. And anyway, it was calm. They says, watch the afternoon winds, you know. You might want to keep an eye on. So I had that in the back of my mind. We were way over by Frank Island, I believe. And we were catching a lot of fish, and we were having a good time and everything, you know, and then I noticed the sky getting kind of dark and stuff, and I thought, well, it's time we better head in, and we headed towards, I started island hopping. And I got in there, and I forget which island it wasn't Dot Island, it was another one. Can't remember that other island. But it was just before the Straits. And I looked out around the island out there, and there was waves bigger than the ocean. It looked like a hurricane. I mean, that water up there is very cold. You last only 2 or 3 minutes in it because of it being so cold. That I thought, better cool it, you know, better stay here and back of the island. And as I was sitting in a kind of a grotto, and there was another boat in there too, and we were kind of sitting out in the storm, and we were fine there.
Yeah.
Only trouble is there's no place to camp there. Yeah, you can get off on the island, probably eat fish, you know, things like that. But I have seen it also, once it blows up there, it sometimes could blow for 2 to 3 weeks straight and not let you off of there. Well, I didn't like that prospect too much. Well, I saw a big cabin cruiser coming along. I thought, well, I could maybe slip in back of him and let him flatten out the tops of the waves, and I could follow him in, because I could tell he was kind of headed to where I wanted to go. And I only had to cross open water there for about, 4 or 5 miles,
What was the length of your boat? It was a smaller boat, wasn't it?
18 foot.
Okay, not too small, but smaller.
Smaller than I wanted to be on that
Yeah.
kind of water. Well, anyway, the guy, he went over the waves all right. There was a couple times he was in trouble. I could see his propellers come out of the water. That's how sharp the tops of the waves were. They all but wanted to curl over like surf. Well, I had my bow up. You couldn't move very fast, but I held the bow up so that I could kind of just slap through them, you know,
Yeah.
and part through them. And there was one particular wave that was extra big, and it went right over the front. I went through the wave, and the water hit the windshield and shattered the windshield. It was about then I asked for a life vest. I believe I asked your mother for a life vest. Panic broke out on the boat, you know. The captain wants a life vest. He's never wore a life vest in his life, and now he wants one, you know. There's something we need to know. So, and I told your mom, I said, well, you take Craig, and I don't think Ryan was along.
No.
He wasn't around there. I said, you get Craig, and I'll try and grab the other 2 buckos and keep them with me, you know.
So I sat on her lap.
Yeah.
Tanya and Dave were in the back, Tanya was behind me. Dave had his head buried in the back seat.
Yeah,
Back.
yeah, that was pretty terrifying. And we only had one engine, if you remember, you know. If you lose your engine, you got trouble. But I had rigged a sea anchor in case I lost the engine, that I could throw the anchor over, and even though it wouldn't touch the bottom of the, because right there it's about 300 feet deep.
Keep you lined up right.
But at least the line pulling through the water in the anchor would hold my bow into the waves. I might end up clear on the other end of the lake before I got done, but at least I'd be going into the waves all the time, not get sideways to them.
Yeah.
So that's what it was called, the sea anchor. I had that all rigged. I was ready to throw it if I had to, if something happened to the engine. Well, the engine, it ran on fine. It's just that it seemed like a whole day to get across that 3 or 4 miles of water. It was really rough.
Yeah.
And when I got in, I was just emotionally exhausted.
And it cracked the windshield, right?
Yeah, it broke the windshield. Broke the windshield. But
Now, I thought the island had bears on it too.
what?
The island had bears on it, potentially had.
Well,
bears.
sometimes they put bears out there that were unruly.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I didn't want to be on the island all that much either.
What was the second boat you owned? Or the next one, I should say.
Oh, I don't know. There was a 20-footer fiberform. And that was a pretty good boat. My best boat that I had that was of that class was a 24-foot Starfire.
Yeah, that's what I remember.
That was probably, but in fact, I wished I owned it today. The one I have now is a flying bridge, 30-foot flying bridge, and it's too big for the lakes where I'm at.
Yeah. Where you at now? You're in Mesquite?
Mesquite, Nevada.
Tell me, let's see. How much time we got? About 15 minutes on the tape, then we're done. Tell me about baby formula.
Oh, gee.
Tell me about what's classified as baby formula.
Well, hey, forgive me, Marcia, if you ever hear that.
She won't.
There was, when we were kids, Marcia Egan and Merritt, they would make up ice cream, homemade ice cream.
And Marcia's your aunt.
Yeah, Aunt Marcia would. And we all loved the ice cream she made, because it was extra different, really different. And we couldn't figure out what was different about it, but it was good and it was different. And of course, Marcia had 12 kids, so she had a ready supply of milk, and she was putting baby formula in the ice cream. Putting ice cream, making ice cream with this, mixing the baby formula, and we found out about it. That ended the ice cream business. We didn't have a whole lot of ice cream after that.
Although this baby formula didn't come out of a can, right?
No, it wasn't out of a can. It was mother's milk. True story, though. It happened. I'm sorry, Marcia, but that's what it is.
Out in Cedar Valley, some of the interesting things. I don't think we've talked much about, but one or maybe even a couple years in a row, there's a rash of fires where it just seemed to, it was just a dry year, seemed to plague that valley. And wasn't there an arsonist that speculatively was out there starting some of these fires?
Well, what got me started worried about it was that particular year there was a lot of rainfall in the spring. And that usually means that there's a lot of June grass. When that phenomenon takes place, that means there's an extra amount of June grass and stuff. And so I had called Art Cook over at Cedar Fort, and I asked him, I said, what's the Cedar Fort engine like? Is it to where it can run this year? And he acknowledged, he says, we've had a lot of rain, we're gonna, you know, he says, I'll check on it, we better do some checking. Well, he reported back to me a couple of days later, and he says, we don't know as it starts, and that's if we can find the keys, and if we can find the keys and it starts and everything might run, which is not a good way to run a fire department. And so I told him, I said, well, it sounds like you told me all I need to know. We're pretty much on our own around here. And so I decided I would figure out some way of finding a fire just right there at the house. I mean, you know, at the barn or house or at the farm or wherever, you know, that was close. Yeah. And particularly concerned about how dry it was. And so I took the blue truck, I called it the little blue truck. And I had a tank that I'd used in construction business to haul diesel fuel to the machines and stuff. It was about 250 gallons or 220 gallon tank. Anyway, I rigged it up with a pump. I went in and I know how to do plumbing and stuff, and I made myself a formidable fire unit fighting.
Dome lights and fire.
Well, I mean, that came later, but I mean, I got it to where it was pretty impressive. It was serious truck.
Yeah.
Little did I know we were going to use it that much that year. But I believe it was your brother David. He came over and he thought I'd lost my marble because it was obvious what I was building. Yeah. And he says, "What are you building, Dad?" And I says, "Well, anybody knows that this is a fire truck, you know." What are you gonna do with a fire truck, Dad? You know? And I got to admit, it was a little off the wall, but I was concerned about trucks having to come 50 minutes to come before they come. I wanted to put a fire out in a hurry. Little fires, you give them 50 minutes, you got a serious fire on your hands. Yeah. So my idea was to just deploy. We came up with some new concepts, some new twists that they're even using still to this day. The drive-by firefighting technique.
How many fires were out there that year? I mean, it was crazy that year.
The little blue truck the first year answered 18 fires, I believe.
1 year.
1 year. David thought if I used it once, it would be a miracle.
Yeah. Now, what was some of the uncanny events around it? Because often you beat the Lehigh Fire Department coming out there, and it often frustrated them.
That wasn't, Lehigh wasn't the problem, the fire marshal's policy. Fire marshal's policy was is that if there was a fire, he had to come from Springville, which is 50 minutes away, take a first-hand look at the fire, and then determine how it was to be fought. And then, if he determined that it was to be fought for a brush fire or a wildfire, then he would fight it himself with his own units out of Springville, which brought another 50 minutes, which took an hour and a half to get trucks on the fire. Well, by that time, the whole place was ablaze.
Yeah.
And I told him that what was concerning me was the response time, the way it was. Lehigh's only 15 minutes away. That would have been reasonable. But he wouldn't turn Lehigh loose.
Because Lehigh was under a contract or something, right?
Yeah,
And
under
it would cost them
contract. They
money.
didn't want to stir up the contract or anything, but they ordered, the fire marshal he has control of the fire.
What did they ever find out? Was it an arson that caused it?
Some of them were, some of them were.
Just some crazy loon out there.
Don't know what it was. It was, some of it was just phenomenal. Some people would park by the sides of the roads with the new catalytic converters that they have on cars and how hot they get underneath. If you park on the grass long enough with those, you can get a fire going and drive off and you don't know that you've set it with your car. And so there was some of that. Then there was some of it was lightning strikes, which was very obvious.
Yeah.
Sometimes it would strike one day and it would hit a cedar tree and this lightning would travel down into the roots, and at the base of a cedar tree there's a lot of pine needles, and that fire would sit there and smolder until the next day at about 3 o'clock in the afternoon. You just about set your watch. 3 o'clock in the afternoon, the wind had come up a little bit and start fanning it and blowing it wherever that lightning had hit the day before.
Yeah.
So we got used to looking as to where the lightning had hit. So we knew right where to watch for a possible fire outbreak.
Right.
And so we were on those fires sometimes within minutes and had them out before you ever imagined.
Tell me about.
But we went to, there was too many. There was some.
That was just a strange. I was in California.
There was
at
some
that time.
phenomena that was going on there. There was some of those had some help, but I don't know who they were, who it was doing. But I didn't really want to do it. I didn't.
Tell me about. Let's go back a little bit. I know that you spent some time in Europe. Just trips with your mom and dad. And one time when you were younger, then later. And a lot of the later was recorded, and we've got about 5 or 6 minutes left on this tape. When you were first married, and that's recorded in the White Family album. A lot of that detail on there, I know, 'cause I've read it. But anything that stands out in your mind that you want to tell us about your travels to Europe, or tell us about when you were younger. Remember how you had to convince your teacher?
Well, I was in junior high school, I guess, is what you're talking about. in junior high school, mom went to the principal and said, "What do you think about us taking Ken out, you know, to Europe for about a month?" Gone about a month. And for somebody in junior high, that's your whole life, you know.
Yeah.
I mean, you forget your locker number, you forget everything. And anyway, the principal was for having me go because he says we could teach him all of the history books that we could possibly do, but him where he'll be right there and see where it's happened will bring it to life to him. Bring the history books to life. And that's exactly what it did. I've always loved history because I know where the Battle of Waterloo was fought, and I've stood on the ground where it is, and I've been in Greece, and you know, it just you read about it in a book, and it just doesn't mean as much as when you're actually standing there and you can see it, smell it, feel it, feel the temperature, and you get a lot more out of it. So I've always been a history buff. I always liked history because of that.
I remember you used to tell me when you went into East Germany, when the Iron Curtain was drawn. Of course, it's not there anymore.
I saw where Checkpoint Charlie was. There was Russian tanks parked, looking at our tanks, guns pointed at each other, and barbed wire and concrete barriers, and the Berlin Wall, of course, is not there anymore, but it was then. They were shooting anybody who was trying to get across there. And so, we've got a bus guided tour, and we crossed over into East Berlin, and it was pretty much, East Berlin was all bombed out. Don't know what it is lately. I don't know what it is now. But 30 years ago, 40 years ago, it was still bombed out from World War II, World War I. And saw where Hitler's bunker was, supposedly was. And saw Stalin's alley. That was all rebuilt. They wanted you to take photographs of that. They didn't want you to take photographs on the back street.
Yeah.
It was just, it was unbelievable what kind of damage war can do to buildings. Gave me a new empathy or sympathy, if you want to say it, or moderate about wanting to have devastation like that, see that kind of thing. Better things that we can do with our money and our lives and stuff than have to do that. Sometimes you have no choice, then you have to do it, but I mean, you talk your way around it, might be better than actually having to. A lot of people lost their lives in it. The people on the east side in East Berlin, I saw young people and none of them smiled. Didn't see anybody smile. The guy who works on my computer, he's from Germany, Bonn, Germany, and I mentioned that to him, and he found that interesting. He smiled. He says, "Well, we don't smile that much." So he thought it was normal, but I thought it was a little abnormal. Because I told him, I said, on West Berlin, people seemed happier, you know, a little lighter. The east side, more pressed look to it.
Yeah.
Am I glad that it's over with and the wall's down? Sure, I'm glad that it's over with.
Just got maybe 3 minutes left. Anything you wanna throw in or talk about? I've kinda given you some keywords or whatever.
Well,
Any words of advice or